Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. I promised some of you all a few days ago that as soon as the opportunity presented itself, I would give you a complete rundown on what we were doing and, more importantly, why we were doing it, the strategy behind what we were doing. I've been asked by Secretary Cheney to do that this evening, and so if you will bear with me, we're going to go through a briefing. I apologize to the folks over here who won't be able to see the charts, but we're going to go through a complete briefing of the operation. This goes back to 7 August to 17 January. As you recall, we started our deployment on the 7th of August. Basically, what we started out against was a couple of 100,000 Iraqis that were in the Kuwait theater of operation. I don't have to remind you all that we brought over initially defensive forces in the form of the 101st, the 82nd, the 24th Mechanized Infantry Division, the 3rd Armored Cavalry, and in essence, we had them arrayed to the south behind the Saudi task force. Also, there were Arab forces over here in this area, arrayed in defensive positions, and that, in essence, is the way we started. In the middle of November, the decision was made to increase the force because by that time, huge numbers of Iraqi forces had flowed into the area, and generally in the disposition as they're shown right here, and therefore we increased the forces and built up more forces. I would tell you that at this time, we made a very deliberate decision to align all of those forces within the boundary looking north towards Kuwait, this being King Khalid Military City over here. So we aligned those forces so it very much looked like they were all aligned directly on the Iraqi position. We also at that time had a very active naval presence out in the Gulf, and we made sure that everybody understood about that naval presence. One of the reasons why we did that is because it became very apparent to us early on that the Iraqis were quite concerned about an amphibious operation across the shores to liberate Kuwait, this being Kuwait City. They put a very, very heavy barrier of infantry along here, and they proceeded to build an extensive barrier that went all the way across the border, down and around and up the side of Kuwait. Basically, the problem we were faced with was this. When you looked at the troop numbers, they really outnumbered us about 3 to 2. And when you consider the number of combat service support people we had, that's logisticians and that sort of thing in our armed forces, as far as fighting troops, we were really outnumbered 2 to 1. In addition to that, they had 4,700 tanks versus our 3,500 when the buildup was complete, and they had a great deal more artillery than we do. I think any student of military strategy would tell you that in order to attack a position, you should have a ratio of approximately 3 to 1 in favor of the attacker. And in order to attack a position that is heavily dug in and barricaded, such as the one we had here, you should have a ratio of 5 to 1 in the way of troops in favor of the attacker. So you can see basically what our problem was at that time. We were outnumbered as a minimum 3 to 2 as far as troops were concerned. We were outnumbered as far as tanks were concerned, and we had to come up with some way to make up the difference. Next chart, please. I apologize for the busy nature of this chart, but I think it's very important for you to understand exactly what our strategy was. What you see here is a color coding where green is a go sign or a good sign as far as our forces are concerned. Yellow would be a caution sign, and red would be a stop sign. Green represents units that have been attrited below 50% strength. The yellow are units that are between 50 and 75% strength, and of course the red are units that are over 75% strength. What we did, of course, was start an extensive air campaign, and I briefed you in quite some detail on that in the past. One of the purposes I told you at that time of that extensive air campaign was to isolate the Kuwaiti theater of operation by taking out all the bridges and supply lines that ran between the north and the southern part of Iraq. That was to prevent reinforcement and supply coming into the southern part of Iraq and the Kuwaiti theater of operation. We also conducted a very heavy bombing campaign, and many people questioned why the extensive bombing campaign. This is the reason why. It was necessary to reduce these forces down to a strength that was that made them weaker, particularly along the front line barrier that we had to go through. We continued our heavy operations out in the sea because we wanted the Iraqis to continue to believe that we were going to conduct a massive amphibious operation in this area. And I think many of you recall the number of amphibious rehearsals we had to include Imminent Thunder that was written about quite extensively for many reasons. But we continued to have those operations because we wanted him to concentrate his forces, which he did. I think this is probably one of the most important parts of the entire briefing I could talk about. As you know, very early on, we took out the Iraqi Air Force. We knew that he had very, very limited reconnaissance means, and therefore when we took out his Air Force, for all intents and purposes, we took out his ability to see what we were doing down here in Saudi Arabia. Once we had taken out his eyes, we did what could best be described as the Hail Mary play in football. I think you recall when the quarterback is desperate for a touchdown at the very end, what he does is he steps up behind the center, and all of a sudden every single one of his receivers goes way out to one flank, and they all run down the field as fast as they possibly can and into the end zone, and he lobs the ball. In essence, that's what we did. When we knew that he couldn't see us anymore, we did a massive movement of troops all the way out to the west, to the extreme west, because at that time we knew that he was still fixed in this area with the vast majority of his forces, and once the air campaign started, he would be incapable of moving out to counter this move, even if he knew we made it. There were some addition of troops out in this area, but they did not have the capability nor the time to put in the barrier that had been described by Saddam Hussein as an absolutely impenetrable tank barrier that no one would ever get through. I believe those were his words. So this was absolutely an extraordinary move, I must tell you. I can't recall any time in the annals of military history when this number of forces have moved over this distance to put themselves in a position to be able to attack. But what's more important, and I think it's very, very important that I make this a point, and that's these logistics bases. Not only did we move the troops out there, but we literally moved thousands and thousands of tons of fuel, of ammunition, of spare parts, of water, and of food out here into this area because we wanted to have enough supplies on hand so that if we launched this and we got into a slugfest battle, which we very easily could have gotten into, we'd have enough supplies to last for 60 days. It was an absolutely gigantic accomplishment, and I can't give credit enough to the logisticians and the transporters who were able to pull this off, to the superb support we had from the Saudi government, the literally thousands and thousands of drivers, really of every national origin who helped us in this move out here. And of course, great credit goes to the commanders of these units who were also able to maneuver their forces out here and put them in this position. But as a result, by the 23rd of February, what you found is this situation. The front lines had been attrited down to a point where all of these units were at 50% or below. The second level, basically, that we had to face, and these were the real tough fighters that we were worried about right here, were attrited to someplace between 50 and 75%, although we still had the Republican Guard located here, and part of the Republican Guard in this area that were very strong, and the Republican Guard up in this area strong. And we continued to hit the bridges all across this area to make absolutely sure that no more reinforcements came into the battle. This was the situation on the 23rd of February. Next, please. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I shouldn't forget these fellows. That SF stands for Special Forces. We put Special Forces deep into the enemy territory. They went out on strategic reconnaissance for us, and they let us know what was going on out there, and they were the eyes that were out there, and very important that I not forget those folks. Next, please. This then was the morning of the 24th. Our plan initially had been to start over here in this area and do exactly what the Iraqis thought we were going to do, and that's take them on head-on into their most heavily defended area. Also, at the same time, we launched amphibious feints and naval gunfire in this area so that they continued to think that we were going to be attacking along this coast and therefore fix their forces in this position. Our hope was that by fixing the forces in this position and with this attack through here in this position, we would basically keep the forces here and they wouldn't know what was going on out in this area. And I believe we succeeded in that very well. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the Marines, the 1st Marine Division and the 2nd Marine Division, launched attacks through the barrier system. They were accompanied by the 2nd, the Tiger Brigade, U.S. Army Tiger Brigade of the 2nd Armored Division. At the same time, over here, 2 Saudi task forces also launched a penetration through this barrier. But while they were doing that, at 4 o'clock in the morning over here, the 6th French Armored Division, accompanied by a brigade of the 82nd Airborne, also launched an overland attack to their objective up in this area, Al Farman Airfield. And we were held up a little bit by the weather, but by 8 o'clock in the morning, the 101st Airborne Air Assault launched an air assault deep in the enemy's territory to establish a forward operating base in this location right here. Let me talk about each one of those moves. First of all, the Saudis over here on the East Coast did a terrific job. They went up against a very, very tough barrier system. They breached the barrier very, very effectively. They moved out aggressively and continued their attack up the coast. I can't say enough about the 2 Marine divisions. If I use words like brilliant, it would really be an under-description of the absolutely superb job that they did in breaching the so-called impenetrable barrier. It was a classic, absolutely classic military breaching of a very, very tough minefield, barbed wire, fire trenches type barrier. They went through the first barrier like it was water. They went across into the second barrier line. Even though they were under artillery fire at the time, they continued to open up that breach, and then they brought both divisions streaming through that breach. Absolutely superb operation, a textbook, and I think it'll be studied for many, many years to come as the way to do it. I would also like to say that the French did an absolutely superb job of moving out rapidly to take their objective out here, and they were very, very successful, as was the 101st. And again, we still had the Special Forces located in this area. What we found was as soon as we breached these obstacles here and started bringing pressure, we started getting a large number of surrenders. And I think I talked to some of you all about that this evening when I briefed you on the evening of the 24th. We found we got a large number of surrenders. We also found that these forces right here were getting a large number of surrenders and were meeting with a great deal of success. We were worried about the weather. The weather, it turned out, was going to get pretty bad the next day, and we were worried about launching this air assault. And we also started to have a huge number of atrocities of really the most unspeakable type committed in downtown Kuwait City, to include reports that the desalinization plant had been destroyed. And when we heard that, we were quite concerned about what might be going on. Based upon that and the situation as it was developing, we made a decision that rather than wait the following morning to launch the remainder of these forces, that we would go ahead and launch those forces that afternoon. Next. So this was the situation you saw the afternoon of the 21st. The Marines continued to make great progress going through the breach in this area, and were moving rapidly north. The Saudi task force on the East Coast was also moving rapidly to the north and making very, very good progress. We launched another Egyptian Arab force in this location and another Saudi force in this location, again to penetrate the barrier, but once again to make the enemy continue to think that we're doing exactly what he wanted us to do, and that's make a headlong assault into a very, very tough barrier system, a very, very tough mission for these folks here. But at the same time, what we did is continued to attack with the French. We launched an attack on the part of the entire 7th Corps, where the 1st Infantry Division went through, breached an obstacle and minefield barrier here, established quite a large breach through which we passed the 1st British Armored Division. At the same time, we launched the 1st Armored Division, the 3rd Armored Division, and because of our deception plan and the way it worked, we didn't even have to worry about a barrier. We just went right around the enemy and were behind him in no time at all. And the 2nd Armored Cavalry Division. And I ought to talk, and the 24th Mech Division also launched out here in the far west, and I ought to talk about the 101st because this is an important point. Once the 101st had their forward operating base established here, they then went ahead and launched into the Tigris and Euphrates Valley. There's a lot of people who are still saying that the object of the United States of America was to capture Iraq and cause a downfall of the entire country of Iraq. Ladies and gentlemen, when we were here, we were 150 miles away from Baghdad, and there was nobody between us and Baghdad. If it had been our intention to take Iraq, if it had been our intention to destroy the country, if it had been our intention to overrun the country, we could have done it unopposed for all intents and purposes from this position at that time. But that was not our intention. We had never said it was our intention. Our intention was purely to eject the Iraqis out of Kuwait and destroy the military power that had come in here. So this was a situation at the end of February the 24th in the afternoon. Next, please. The next 2 days went exactly like we thought they would go. The Saudis continued to make great progress up on the eastern flank, keeping the pressure off the Marines on the flank here. The Special Forces went out and started operating small boat operations out in this area to help clear mines, but also to threaten the flanks here and to continue to make them think that we were, in fact, going to conduct amphibious operations. The Saudi forces that came in and took and Arab forces that came in and took these two initial objectives turned to come in on the flank heading towards Kuwait City, located right in this area here. The British UK passed through and continued to attack up this flank, and of course the 7th Corps came in and attacked in this direction as shown here. The 24th Infantry Division made an unbelievable move all the way across into the Tigris and Euphrates Valley and proceeded in blocking this avenue of egress out, which was the only avenue of egress left because we continued to make sure that the bridges stayed down. So there was no way out once the 24th was in this area, and the 101st continued to operate in here. The French, having succeeded in achieving all of their objectives, then set up a flanking position, a flank guard position here to make sure that no forces come in and get us from the flank. By this time, we had destroyed or rendered completely ineffective over 21 Iraqi divisions. Next, please. And of course, that then brings us to today. Where we are today is we now have a solid wall across the north of the 18th Airborne Corps, consisting of the units shown right here, attacking straight to the east. We have a solid wall here again of the 7th Corps, also attacking straight to the east. The forces that they are fighting right now are the forces of the Republican Guard. Again, today we had a very significant day when the Arab forces coming from both the west and the east closed in and moved into Kuwait City, where they are now in the process of clearing Kuwait City entirely and assuring that it's absolutely secure. The 1st Marine Division continues to hold Kuwaiti International Airport. The 2nd Marine Division continues to be in a position where it blocks any egress out of the city of Kuwait so no one can leave. To date, we have destroyed over 29, destroyed or rendered inoperable. I don't like to say destroyed because that gives you the visions of absolutely killing everyone, and that's not what we're doing. But we have rendered completely ineffective over 29 Iraqi divisions, and the gates are closed. There is no way out of here. There is no way out of here, and the enemy is fighting us in this location right here. We continue, of course, to have overwhelming air power. The air has done a terrific job from start to finish in supporting the ground forces, and we also have had great support from the Navy, both in the form of naval gunfire and in the support of carrier air. That's the situation at the present time. Next, please. Peace is not without a cost. These have been the U.S. casualties to date. As you can see, these are the casualties that we had in the air war. Then, of course, we had the terrible misfortune of the Scud attack the other night, which, again, because the weapon malfunctioned, it caused death, unfortunately, rather than a proper function. And then, of course, these are the casualties in the ground war to death, the total being as shown here. Next. Hold on for 1 second. 1 second is up. Next, please. We'll put all these charts that have them available for you afterwards. Now, I would just like to comment briefly about that casualty chart. The loss of one human life is intolerable to any of us who are in the military. But I would tell you that casualties of that order of magnitude, considering the job that's been done and the number of forces that are involved, is almost miraculous as far as the light number of casualties. It'll never be miraculous to the families of those people, but it is miraculous. Anyhow, this is what's happened to date with the Iraqis. They started out with over 4,000 tanks. As of today, we have over 3,000 confirmed destroyed, and I do mean destroyed or captured. And as a matter of fact, that number is low because you can add 700 to that as a result of the battle that's going on right now with the Republican Guard. So that number is very, very high, and we've almost completely destroyed the offensive capability of the Iraqi forces in the Kuwaiti theater of operation. The armored vehicle count is also very, very high, and of course you can see we're doing great damage to the artillery. The battle is still going on, and I suspect that these numbers will mount rather considerably. Next. I wish I could give you a better number on this. To be very honest with you, this is just a wild guess. It's an estimate that was sent to us by the field today at noontime, but the prisoners out there are so heavy and so extensive, and obviously we're not in the business of going around counting noses at this time to determine precisely what the exact number is. But we're very, very confident that we have well over 50,000 prisoners of war at this time, and that number is mounting on a continuing basis. I would remind you that the war is continuing to go on. Even as we speak right now, there's fighting going on out there. Even as we speak right now, there are incredible acts of bravery going on. This afternoon, we had an F-16 pilot shot down. We had contact with him. He had a broken leg on the ground. 2 helicopters from the 101st, they didn't have to do it, but they went in to try and pull that pilot out. One of them was shot down, and we're still in the process of working through that. But that's the kind of thing that's going on out on that battlefield right now. It is not a Nintendo game. It is a tough battlefield where people are risking their lives at all time, and great heroes out there, and we ought to all be very, very proud of them. That's the campaign to date. That's the strategy to date, and I'd now be very happy to take any questions anyone might have. Yes, sir.
All these divisions along the border, which were seriously attrited, it figures to be about 200,000 troops, maybe, that were there. You've got 50,000 prisoners. Where's the rest of them?
There was a very, very large number of dead in these units, a very, very large number of dead. We even found them when we went into the units ourselves and found them in the trench lines. There were very heavy desertions. At one point, we had reports of desertion rates of more than 30% of the units that were along the front here. As you know, we had quite a large number of POWs that came across, and so I think it's a combination of desertions. There's a combination of people that were killed. There's a combination of the people that we've captured, and there's a combination of some other people who are just flat still running.
I'm wondering what you would say to people who would say the purpose of this war was to get the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and they're now out. What would you say to that public that is thinking that right now?
I would say that there was a lot more purpose of this war than just get the Iraqis out of Kuwait. The purpose of this war was to enforce the resolutions of the United Nations. There's some 12 different resolutions of the United Nations, not all of which have been accepted by Iraq to date, as I understand it. Okay? But I got to tell you that in the business of the military, of a military commander, my job is not to go ahead and at some point say, well, that's great, they just now pulled out of Kuwait. Even though they're still shooting at us, they're moving backwards, and therefore I've accomplished my mission. That's not the way you fight it, and that's not the way I would ever fight it.
What kind of fight is going on with the Republican Guard? And is there any more fighting going on in Kuwait, or is Kuwait essentially out of the action?
No. The type of fight that's going on with the Republican Guard right now is just a classic tank battle. You've got fire and maneuver. You've got they are continuing to fight and shoot at us as our forces move forward, and our forces are in the business of outflanking them, taking them from the rear, using our attack helicopters, using our advanced technology. I would tell you that one of the things that has prevailed, particularly in this battle out here, is our technology. We had great weather for the air war, but right now and for the last 3 days, it's been raining out there, it's been dusty out there, there's black smoke and haze in the air. It's an infantryman's weather. God loves the infantryman, and that's just the kind of weather the infantryman likes to fight in. But I would also tell you that our sights have worked fantastically well in their ability to acquire, through that kind of dust and haze, the enemy targets. And the enemy sights have not worked that well. As a matter of fact, we've had several anecdotal reports today of enemies who were saying to us that they couldn't see anything through their sights, and all of a sudden their tank exploded when their tank was hit by our sight.
General, there have been reports that when the Iraqis left Kuwait City, they took with them a number of the Kuwaiti people as hostages. What can you tell us about this?
We've heard that they took up to 40,000. I think that you've probably heard the Kuwaitis themselves who are left in the city state that they were taking people and that they have taken them. So I don't think there's any question about the fact that there was a very, very large number of young Kuwaitis, males, taken out of that city within the last week or two. But that pales to insignificance compared to the absolutely unspeakable atrocities that occurred in Kuwait in the last week. They're not a part of the same human race. The people that did that the rest of us are. I've got to pray that that's the case.
Is there a military or political explanation as to why the Iraqis did not use chemical weapons?
We've got a lot of questions about why the Iraqis didn't use chemical weapons, and I don't know the answer. But I just thank God that they didn't.
They didn't use them because they didn't have time to react, and they were defeated.
You want me to speculate? I'll be delighted to speculate. Nobody can ever pin you down when you speculate. Number one, we destroyed their artillery. We went after their artillery big time. They had major desertions in their artillery, and the artillery that would have been, and that's how they would have delivered their chemical weapons, either that or by air, and we all know what happened to the air. So we went after their artillery big time, and I think we were probably highly, highly effective in going after their artillery. There's other people who are speculating that the reason why they didn't use chemical weapons is because they're afraid that if they use chemical weapons, there'd be nuclear retaliation. There's other people that speculate that they didn't use their chemical weapons because their chemical weapons degraded, and because of the damage that we did to their chemical production facilities, they were unable to upgrade the chemicals within their weapons as a result of that degradation. That was one of the reasons, among others, why we went after their chemical production facilities early on in the strategic campaign. I'll never know the answer to that question, but as I say, thank God that they didn't.
General Norman Schwarzkopf, commander of Allied forces in the Gulf, briefing reporters earlier Wednesday on the strategy used against the Iraqi army.